Welcome to the Afterthoughts podcast, episode 60. As you know, every time we reach episode 60, we like to mix it up a little bit and do something special. Ethan's not here today, so we thought we'd try something called 20 quotes that will change your life. No banter, just the good stuff. So Ryan, take it away.
Quote number 1, we're all running from pain. Some of us take pills, some of us couch surf while binge watching Netflix, some of us read romance novels. We'll do almost anything to distract ourselves from ourselves. Yet all this trying to insulate ourselves from pain seems only to have made our pain worse. Anna Lembke.
Anna Lembke from her book, Dopamine Nation, which is a phenomenal book. The way our dopamine systems are designed, moving into the future as we just get more and more options for how to get quick and easy dopamine hits. It's going to continue to exhaust our brains even more, depleting us of more and more dopamine. And addiction in 2024 is not just about whiskey and heroin. It's a much bigger topic that has to do with every single human being, because all of us are medicating and all of us are running from pain in some way, shape, or form. And we now have a million different distractions and drugs of choice to run to. The question isn't, what is your drug of choice? Is it, a pill bottle? Is it alcohol? Is it shopping? Is it ambition? I think we all know. The better question is, what is your drug of choice hiding from you? Because it's not until you choose to face it and truly feel it that God can begin to actually heal it. And what's amazing to me is that sociologists and scientists are now using natural selection language when describing our generation and the future, saying that nature is going to select for those of us who know how to self-regulate and have self-control in a world that's full of super stimuli and quick dopamine hits. The future belongs to those with self-control. And that baffles my mind. The most valuable thing or characteristic of a person moving forward into the future might be your ability to self-regulate and say no to very common and readily available dopamine hits that everybody else is doing, but what it's also doing is draining the dopamine a little bit more and a little bit more.
I love it because I think that question you asked, what are you medicating, is the question. I don't read romance novels, but I do read a lot of like fiction books. I love it. And I think that can be an escape for me, or it can be a healthy way for me to retreat. And the difference is when I'm trying to medicate and I'm trying to numb something that happened at church or whatever, and I'm just using it as an escape pod, versus, no, I've taken the time to process that tough meeting or whatever it is, and now it's time to rest for the evening, and so I'm going to read this book. Same action, two very different motivators. And so I think that's really well said. And I love that self-control is a fruit of the Spirit. I feel like we always say like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, and then we kind of like trail off. But it's that last one, self-control. It's the Holy Spirit that gives us self-control to say no to cheap dopamine so we can experience it the way that God intended.
Yeah, I keep seeing all over Instagram, stop saying yes to cheap dopamine hits. And we all know, I mean, social media, Netflix, like
as you're scrolling.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Oh, you mean what I'm doing right now is a cheap dopamine hit? Yes, exactly. And, you don't get legalistic about it or hyper religious about it because then you stop enjoying just the gifts that God has given us. Yeah. But simply understanding there's a difference between the little dopamine hit I'm getting here and the real dopamine that oftentimes is slower and has a little bit of a different taste to it. The real dopamine that comes from having an hour-long conversation with your wife instead of you guys watching another TV show tonight. You know what I mean? It's exercising instead of getting an energy drink to try to get some endorphins going in your blood. There's a difference between those two dopamine types. Next quote, you can't fix a problem with the same consciousness that created it. Albert Einstein.
This may be the most important ministry quote that I've ever come across. And he's not even talking about ministry. But when it comes to doing ministry or whatever that looks like for whatever your ministry is, realizing that there are a lot of problems in this world, and that if we try to approach the problems from the same consciousness, from the same level that created the problem in the first place, we're just going to end up in like this tennis match where we're hitting the ball back and forth. Right. This is what politics is to me, to a T. It's two sides just hitting the ball back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But I think with ministry, it's extra important because what you see all the time is somebody will come to me, or I'll sit down with two people and they'll both be so angry with one another. And the whole meeting will be like, well, he said this and she said that, but she said this and he said that and he did that. And at some point, I'm constantly trying to help them see, okay, obviously we're all imperfect people who have done imperfect things and hurt each other in our own ways. We can keep just going around in a circle and retaliating for these things, or we could learn to think outside the box and take a step and get higher and see what's actually happening here. And if we can do that, we can actually move towards meeting each other halfway and finding some reconciliation, finding some forgiveness. It's like every violent movie you watch is all about retaliation, vengeance, and we love it. We're like, oh yeah, go get him because he did that to you, right? And like, there's a very primal thing like to that. I get it, but what Jesus taught was so different. It was, hey, turn the other cheek, or love your enemy, or pray for those who persecute you. It's Jesus coming on the scene going, there's a higher way to think about all of this. And if we can learn to think higher about problems, we can actually make some movement forward. But you're never going to be able to fix a problem from the same consciousness that created it.
Forgiveness is a different level of consciousness than revenge or bitterness. When somebody wrongs you, somebody hurts you, the bitterness you're feeling or the revenge that you want to get, or those scenarios you play over and over again in your head where you go back in time to that conversation, but now you thought about it, so you know the exact right thing to say to get them, and in your imagination, you get them again and again, and it feels really good, is the same consciousness level that person was in when they did the thing that caused you pain and hurt you in the first place. And Jesus is inviting us to get above that and zoom out, think with a different level of consciousness. There's something greater than the bitterness, and it's going to seem very, very backwards and unfair at first. Forgiveness.
So good. The whole Old Testament, right, was us trying to get to God from the same level of consciousness. And then Jesus goes, what if I actually stepped out of heaven and came for you and laid down my perfect life that you may go free?
Mm-hmm.
Quote number 3, when you are a pastor, you are supposed to care about everyone and treat everyone equally, or at least that's how I understood the role. But those good intentions left me with a leadership pyramid that was completely backward. If you wanted my time, all you had to do was complain a lot. If you were 100% on board, completely committed to the vision, I didn't have time for you. As a result, I unwittingly encouraged negative behavior. Erwin McManus.
Erwin McManus, from a book called Mind Shift, which I highly recommend. I've said that a few times on this podcast. I was asked recently, we went to dinner with a couple that is about to plant a church. And one of them asked me, what would you do different if you could go back in time 6 years to when we first started this church? And everything had to do with this exact quote. And I guess, you know how there's the food pyramid that has basically been a scam for like 30 or 40 years, and it's completely upside down, and we're now realizing that.
You got to eat a ton of pasta.
Yeah, pasta and bread should be 80% of your diet, and then some veggies, and then some fruits, and then fats. Even healthy fats are terrible for you, and it's all exactly wrong. My time pyramid was flipped because you only have a certain amount of time to give to everybody in the church that you're starting, or the company that you're leading, or just in your life in general. And what Erwin is saying here is if somebody complained a lot, they got his time. because if somebody had a problem with how they were running the church, he wanted to win them over. And so all you had to do was have a loud voice that critiqued, and you'd get an hour-long coffee with him where he would pander to that, and in the name of being noble or a good leader, try to convince you that no, the way we're doing it is correct. When in reality, if you are building a church, this is just our arena, by definition, everybody's not going to feel called to this church. And as you grow, clarity becomes kindness, and you get more and more clear on the vision. This is what we are, this is what we're not. And in doing so, you do a favor to everybody because you essentially help them make a decision. Is this church for you or is it not? And if it's not, there's probably a better one for you. So rather than me taking all that time to convince you that this is the best way to do it, stop convincing people to stay. And what's funny about it is we have so many incredible volunteers. There's a few in my brain that are just sort of the representative example for me, where they've been 100% bought in and on board and just show up and help build it. And they give to the church and they pray for the church and they invite to the church and they serve at the church. And because of that, I've never gotten lunch with them because that person's just good. So I'm going to go get lunch with the complainers because they're not good. So I want to make sure I don't want to be misunderstood. So, and if I could go back in time, I would flip that food pyramid or that time pyramid around and give the best of me to those who are on board with us and what we're doing.
I'm not great at this one. It's paradigm shifting for me, but it's so important and it's so good. And I think for anybody watching, listening, it's like, even if you have friends in a friend group and you've been trying so hard to like hold on to that relationship, there's a time and a place to fight for friendship. There's also a time to realize like, hey, there's going to be seasons to life. And if you can learn to approach it with more of an open handed policy and trust the Lord in it, then you'll actually realize that He's going to bring the right people to your life at the right time. That's really good.
Amen. My dear Lucy, I wrote this story for you, but when I began it, I had not realized that girls grow quicker than books. As a result, you are already too old for fairy tales, and by the time it is printed and bound, you will be older still. But someday you will be old enough to start reading fairy tales again. You can then take it down from some upper shelf, dust it, and tell me what you think of it. I shall probably be too deaf to hear and too old to understand a word you say, but I shall still be your affectionate godfather, C.S. Lewis.
You know, Lewis is good because he can write a dedication to a book, and it gets me.
That's the dedication?
That's the dedication to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which was the first Narnia book that he wrote. And he wrote it to Lucy, who, if you know the story, appears in the story. But Narnia, so I've got so much to say. Lewis is one of the most profound thinkers that maybe we've ever had. And yet he kind of shifted gears and ended up writing this fantasy story called Narnia, which is, I think, his way of saying, I'm very good at explaining things, and some of the mysteries of the gospel are too deep for words. They require story. And so he writes the 7 books series called Narnia, that you can just read it and it's a fun story, but then you read it again and you're like, oh, okay, there's a lot of layers to this. But he dedicates it to Lucy. And what I love about that dedication is you see the progression of simplicity of life, and then complexity of life, and then simplicity again. In other words, at the beginning of life, you love fairy tales and everything makes sense, and you can just read stories and understand like, yeah, this is how it's supposed to work. As you keep growing, life gets very complicated, and people say things to you, and things happen, and unfortunate events, and pain, and grief, and all of that. And along the way, the stories stop making sense, and you see like people make a shift even from reading fiction storybooks to like, no, I'm just going to read these nonfiction books where I can get better with my career and I can grow, and all of that stuff is great. But what Lewis is saying, I think in a really sweet way, is, hey, if you keep going, one day you're going to be old enough for fairy tales again. In other words, there's a simplicity on the other side of complexity. A lot of theologians call it the second naivete, where it's like at first you understand, let's say, the gospel, and then you grow a little bit more and you're like, yeah, but can it really be that good? But if you keep going through that, you realize, oh, I actually understand at a deeper level a God who would give up his life to be with me and to want to be in relationship with me. And it's like this simplicity returns to everything if you go through the complexity. And so that quote, that dedication makes me cry, because it's him saying, by the time this book is bound, which the publishing world just moves so slow, right? And so like literally by the time it's bound, she'll probably have outgrown books like Narnia. But what he's saying to her, but I think to all of us, is, hey, keep going, keep chasing truth, because eventually truth's going to bring you back to a place of simplicity where you realize, oh, this is actually a lot more beautiful and profound than I realized at first. And it actually is this simple, like love God and love your neighbor as yourself. It's so brilliant. It's so brilliant.
Because Jesus said the kingdom belongs to those who can receive it like little kids. And we start that way, and then life happens and we have responsibility, and we mature and we take everything way more serious, and we call it being responsible. And then somewhere along the way, hopefully, I mean, there's a reason on social media when you see all the interviews with people who are 100 years old and they all get asked the same question: what do you wish you could tell your younger self, or what advice do you have for people who are younger? And all of it has to do with take yourself less serious, have more fun, worry less, because worry doesn't change anything anyways. There's like an arrival at childlike wonder again. And all of them seem to be imploring us to get there as fast as we can. All the worry is for nothing. And there's a simplicity to the kingdom that can only be received with a childlike spirit. I don't know if this is relevant at all, but I think of Jim Gaffigan joking about billionaires like Elon Musk, who probably has the most advanced brain on planet Earth. That might be an exaggeration, but you know what I mean. He's a genius. He's a prodigy, and he's brilliant. And yet, Jim Gaffigan jokes, and he's going to build a spaceship. It's like when you're a 6-year-old boy. What do you want to do one day? I'm going to build a spaceship, and I'm going to go to space and Mars. And Elon, who is the pinnacle of a brain, is doing that and building a truck. Who would design the Cybertruck? Will and Zeke.
Oh, totally.
6-year-old boys. They see that and they go, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. And there is like a little bit of he's gotten so smart that he's almost started over again. And he's like that. There's a part of his heart that's the 6-year-old boy that's launching spaceships and creating Cybertrucks and solving all the world's problems with a different consciousness than the way we created those problems.
So good, man. Because I think so much about the deep theological questions, and I study scripture so much, and I nerd out about this stuff so much, and it becomes very complicated when you really dive into it. And I think the reason that quote always brings me back is because what I've also experienced is when you keep going and you keep wading through the deep end of spirituality, every single time, man, you come back to this very simple, childlike, no, God just really, really loves us, and we're okay because he loves us. Mm-hmm. And it's like Will and Zeke could understand that right now, and so to the one who feels like they're wandering in the darkness right now, or lost in the deep end, keep going. Because there is a simplicity on the other side of all of it. I don't think any of us should trust fate to write the story of our lives. Fate is a terrible writer. by one of the best writers, Donald Miller.
That's really good. I think the future, a lot of us treat it like it's this magical, mysterious thing. What's the future going to be for me? We'll see what fate decides. We'll see what the universe cooks up. It's going to be this mysterious, and that just sort of demystifies it. The future you is not as mysterious as you think it is. Yeah, sure, life happens, and you could call it fate. You could call it just luck. You could call it living in a broken world. You could call it the spontaneity side or the entropy side of life. Sure. But the future you is not a mystery. The future you will simply be a sum total of all of your thoughts, prayers, and decisions. You will get to where you're going to one step at a time. And so who are you in 10 years? Well, just multiply out or add up the thoughts and prayers and decisions of today or this week. And where is that leading you? Okay, that's where you're going to go. And that's where you will be. So the future is actually not as magical as we all make it out to be. Like, I wonder what it's going to be. It's going to be what we create. It's going to be, your future is going to be what you make. And when you realize that, because when you say fate is writing my story, well then all the agency of your life and all the power of your life and the pen for your life story is in fate's hands. And that's a terrible place for it. I think that's just a cop-out. And it's lazy or it's afraid. And realizing, no, I have the agency to make decisions that God has given me. And there's something inside of me that wants to experience transformation. And if I simply choose that, rather than let fate determine where I am in 5 years, that's when everything about your life will begin to change.
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think about how big the astrology industry is, psychics, people going to other people, asking and pleading, and systems and whatever, like, please tell me what's going to happen. Please tell me what my fate is. And I love what Don's saying. I love what you're saying. I think at some level, that is just a convenient way to not take agency over our own lives and go, who am I being today? And this is the world. Is this the world that I want? Because I'm creating it in my own small way today.
I remember when I got my first credit card, I turned 18 and there was all these companies that deemed me worthy of a credit card. I was like, wow, I'm very impressed with the potential you see in me, to quote Michael Scott. And I got my first credit card, and this was still when we got the bills in the mail, and I got my first statement a month later, and I looked at the bottom line and I was like, what? Like, this is a mistake. Like, how'd I get here? What a mystery this number is. Oh, wait, except they show you exactly how you got there. Every single step.
Yeah. Every bad decision.
You took the toll road, you went to Chipotle, you got extra guac. You took the toll road home, you bought new jeans, you bought new shoes, Chipotle, toll road every time. We get to that number and we go, what a mystery. No, it's not. You will get to where you're going one decision at a time. Demystify the future you by taking agency and taking the pen back from fate. We must never see poverty or justice as issues, quote unquote, that need solutions. Rather, we must see the human beings at the heart of those issues as people who need and deserve our love and respect. Richard Stearns.
My first full-time ministry job was to run all the local missions at this great church in California. And so at a pretty young age, I was put in charge of a budget that was, church was basically saying, take this budget and make the biggest impact in the community that you can, which is a great endeavor to go on. It didn't take long for me to be overwhelmed by all of the other challenges in the world that you see. Like, as soon as anyone that's tried to make a difference knows this, as soon as you start trying to help, you see that there are bigger issues upstream that are keeping some people stuck. And so you go, okay, so the church could move in and help here. But if this doesn't change, like at a systemic level, then they're just going to be right back into that same situation. And so it becomes this kind of overwhelming. Yeah, I had a few overwhelming moments where I felt like everything was hopeless. Like, well, we could help pay for this rent right here, but if we don't fix this problem, the same situation is going to happen 30 days from now. And I read a book called The Hole in Our Gospel by Richard Stearns, who's the president of World Vision. And so World Vision making a huge impact all over the world. And I love that this paragraph, Stearns broke it down and he goes, okay, all of those questions about all of the issues are really important. And it's like essential as followers of Jesus that we get into the mix and we have a voice. And at the end of the day, we have to realize that these aren't issues primarily, but these are individual human beings at the core of these issues. And each one of those individual people need and deserve our love and respect. So I printed out this quote and I hung it in my office because it was this reminder of to like be in it from a high level from 30,000 feet as best as you can every day. And at the exact same time, never forget that these are individual people that we're talking to. And so if this is to anyone who feels frustrated, maybe you got into you became a nurse because you wanted to help in the medical field, and then you started to realize there's all these other things in the medical world keeping people stuck, or the education system if you're a teacher. All of that stuff, it's important to have a voice in it. And today, you have somebody right in front of you, a client or a student or whoever it is right in front of you that you can help. And so don't get too lost in the hopelessness of all the systems that you forget to help and love the person right in front of you. And so I've had to learn that the hard way, and continue to come back to, okay, who is the Lord putting right in front of me today that I can speak into and have an influence on today?
That's really good. That also just kind of makes me think in a different way of that quote. Every behavior has a backstory, and human beings are obsessed with behaviors, but Jesus was obsessed with the backstory behind every behavior and wanted to know the heart of the human being and how this person got here, and always seeing the humanity and the story behind every statistic.
Yeah.
What we do, measurements are very helpful when you
Mhm.
try to gauge the health of a church or an organization. I think right now there's almost 180 people signed up to be baptized this weekend.
Amazing.
And that's so incredible. And the number's important and it should be celebrated, and we need to prepare for it. And then also to remember, man, every one of those is a soul and a story. And and to never get away from that. Yeah.
He goes on to tell the classic Starfish story, that it gets told a lot for good reason. So two kids walking on the beach, and there's a bunch of starfish that have washed up on shore, and they're dying. They need to get back into the ocean, and one of them starts picking up starfish, and one at a time, throwing them back into the water. And the other goes, "Well, there's like 1,000 starfish out here. You really think you can make a difference? What are you doing?" And the other kid goes, "I just made a difference for that one."
Mm-hmm.
Picks it up, throws it in. It's like, okay, so yes, we've got this grand problem, and then we have agency to help the person right in front of us. And so let's never forget to celebrate that. Here's Carol Carlson. This is from 40 Days of Decrease, right?
Yeah.
Which is a phenomenal book.
Mm-hmm.
She never looked at fame as being the culmination of personal triumph. To Corey, it was simply a result of God's plans. Her way of handling adulation was to take each compliment as a flower and then gather them all in a bouquet and give them back to Jesus by saying, "Here, Lord, they belong to you."
Carol C. Carlson is writing that about Corrie ten Boom, who back during World War II, her and her family were trying to rescue Jews from the Holocaust and hiding Jews in their home, and they got caught and they got sent to a concentration camp, and where she continued to make a difference and then wrote a book about it. And she started to gain a little bit of influence and even fame for her story. And people asked her, how do you handle the attention? And that's how she described it, as every time people give me a compliment and every time people praise me or applaud me, I don't have false humility where I say, no, we do that all the time. All God, all God. I used to do that with sermons. If I preached a sermon that it was helpful for them, Doug, man, that was life-changing, or that sermon was amazing. Oh, all him. It's all him. And somebody called me on it and said, if it really is just all God, then why do you work so hard? Because didn't you just write that for 20 hours? I guess you didn't have to if it was all God. Or maybe it's
so much easier.
Yeah. Or maybe it's God through you. And maybe that was his idea, that God would go, it's my power and my authority through human beings who are simply willing to be used. And so she realized that. And so she, instead of deflecting, she would receive the encouragement. Thank you. Thank you for saying that about my story or about this project I put all of my time, talent, and energy into. I'm glad it was helpful, and it encourages me in who God made me to be, that it changed your life. So thank you. And she would receive them like flowers. And then at the end of every night, she would get on her knees and offer the bouquet to God and say, God, this built me up today. And ultimately, I know I wouldn't have a story, and I wouldn't have a talent, and I wouldn't have this opportunity if you didn't give it to me in the first place. So I'm working on that. If I get, because you also get criticism, and you will do with criticism what you do with praise. So you must practice it on praise. If you get drunk off the praise of people, then the critiques of people will kill you. That's one way of discerning, how am I doing with applause and praise? Well, how offended do you get when somebody gives you criticism? Because you're doing with that criticism what you did with the praise of people. If you live by praise, you will die by critique. And so her answer was, I'm going to receive that affirmation like a flower and let it build me. And then at the end of the day, I'm going to offer all of it to God.
Last fall, we taught a series of lectures called Brainstorm. And I remember talking to, like, we were working this out in your office, and we were talking about Jesus. Remember this riding in to Jerusalem on Sunday, Palm Sunday, and everyone is shouting, Hosanna, Hosanna, save us. So everyone's going, you're the guy, you're the guy, you're the guy. It's all praise. And by Friday, that same crowd is yelling, crucify him. And it's like, man, the crowd will give you praise, and then the crowd will kill you.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you live by their praise, you're going to die by their critique. Jesus, you almost feel the disciples walking in with Jesus, just like, yeah, we've made it. We're somebody. And you just feel like Jesus was unaffected by the hosannas, because he knew. And it wasn't because he didn't care about them. It's because he cared about them so much that he wasn't going to allow himself to get drunk on the praise, because he knew he was going to have to sustain the cross.
Boom.
It's beautiful.
Yep. This next quote you might recognize because you said it in Single Today. Wonder mocks the tomorrow trap.
So Single Today is the book I put out earlier this year that I wrote for about 4 years, all about the beauty and how sacred singleness can be. And I believe that, man. I feel like since I put out the book, what started to happen with singleness is my sense is it's become this thing that's applauded almost in this very like watered down way, where it's like, yeah, just be independent. You don't need somebody. And so most of my conversations with people have been like, hey, so just so you know, like, I'm a huge fan of marriage. And I push people towards marriage all the time. I officiate weddings all the time because I feel like that is a fairly watered down version of a very sacred subject for me, that I also believe there's room for singleness at the table. Jesus was single. Paul was single. When you are single, you have a really beautiful opportunity to connect with God in a way that married people don't. And in the same way, you get sanctified in marriage in a way that I don't. I get sanctified in singleness in a way that you don't. And so this line means the world to me from that book. Wonder mocks the tomorrow trap. The tomorrow trap is one of the chapters where I'm talking about the future and how often this is true of any human, but it's especially true when you're single. You'll be going along your day, everything will be good, and then something will get you to start worrying about tomorrow and about the future. And I call it the tomorrow trap because that's what it is. It like grabs you and it like snares you. And suddenly you can't be focused in the room that you're in the conversation that you're in, because you're thinking in the singleness conversation, it's always like, wait, am I running out of time? Wait, are all the good ones going to be taken? Wait, am I going to be single for the rest of my life? Wait, all my friends are getting married, but I'm not getting married. All my friends are having kids, but I'm not having kids. All of that time stuff about the future is wild. I call it the shot clock. When you're single, the shot clock, you always feel like you're like 3, 2, 1, you're running out of time. And then as I talk about that for several chapters, and then it gets to a point where I take a trip to Yosemite and I spend a week by myself sitting around like in nature, watching the birds and going on these hikes. And this line, wonder mocks the tomorrow trap, has meant the world to me, because when I'm in those moments and I'm seeing the beauty of the world and I'm watching the sunset, or I'm seeing how much detail the creator put into all of this, and then the fact that same God cares so deeply about me, it's like I don't worry about the tomorrow trap at all, because I go, oh, I'm fine. Everything's fine. We got this. God's got this. And so I think that God is always inviting us into wonder and to awe. It just takes a little bit of work to get there, especially when you're single. But if you can rediscover wonder, I think it's the best antidote to the tomorrow trap.
I wonder if wonder can only be experienced in the present. Like you have to be in the present moment to be in a state of wonder. By the way, I love the shot clock analogy. It kind of reminds me of when we were kids playing basketball in the driveway and you'd count down the shot clock in your head and you throw up the 3-pointer and then 3, 2, 1, and then you brick it and you miss it and then you grab it, you start again. You're like, that wasn't actually it. Now there's 5 seconds left, and then you keep doing it until you make it. I feel like the shot clock's in your head. The shot clock's actually in your head.
Yeah,
I like that.
And so take a moment and learn how to exhale, and realize that wonder always mocks the tomorrow trap.
That's good.
If I have a hope, it's that God sat over the dark nothing and wrote you and me specifically into the story and put us in with the sunset and the rainstorm, as though to say, enjoy your place in my story. The beauty of it means you matter, and you can create within it, even as I have created you. Donald Miller.
Yep. That is, you can create within my story, even as I have created you. The first verse in the Bible, in the beginning, God created. So the very first thing we learn about God, other than the fact that he was there before anything else, before the beginning, because he started the beginning, is that God is a creator and he's creative. And if you're made in his image, that means you are also creative. You were put here to create, creatively made in the image of a creative God. And once again, that kind of goes back to take the pen away from fate and create within this story. And God's saying, if you look around at the beauty of it all, and this comes back to wonder as well, the starry night sky, the rainstorm, the sunset, all these amazing things to experience. Faith is your sixth sense of the creator behind the creation. And the fact that creation is beautiful is the creator's way of saying, that's because you matter to me. And I placed you within this story, and you can create within it, even as I have created you.
I love it. I didn't mean to put those two quotes next to each other, but that's kind of Miller's way of saying the same thing. There's beauty everywhere. We just need to learn how to see it and learn how to receive it. And I think creating is the best way to critique. So you can sit around and just critique all the time, critique. This is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong.
Yeah.
This is wrong. Or you can realize that you have agency to do something
Right.
about it and step up and create.
Mm-hmm. Both creativity and critique see what is, but only creativity sees what could be and then goes and makes it. We are starved for quiet, to hear the sound of sheer silence that is the presence of God himself. Ruth Haley Barton.
Ruth Haley Barton's another one of my favorite writers. I recommend everything she does, especially strengthening the soul of your leadership. She writes, we are starved for quiet. And putting starved as the word in front of quiet, I just think is really good writing. But what I think she's getting at is the world is so noisy all the time. Everywhere you go, you get in your car and you immediately turn on some form of music or podcast or way to distract you. You get to a line at the grocery store and you immediately pull out your phone. You get too bored with the conversation, the podcast you're listening to, and I bet you somebody's got multiple windows up right now, like kind of listening to this, kind of not, right? Like the world is so noisy. And what Ruth, I think, is getting at is along the way, we're actually so hungry for the very thing that we need, which is silence. But the problem is we're afraid of it. You ever get like so hungry that nothing sounds good? I think it's the same thing with silence, and Ruth Haley Barton saying if you can learn how to move past that and sit in the silence, that's actually where you learn that God is God. It's like the psalmist says in Psalm 46:10, be still and know that I am God. When you can learn to sit in the quiet, what happens is it's very uncomfortable at first because all of the distractions from the day come to mind. All the awkward conversations from the day come to mind. All the things you're worried about for tomorrow come to mind. But if you can allow yourself to sit in that with the Lord and realize that God is actually in control of all of that and that his grace covers all of the mistakes and that he has a plan for your tomorrow, then slowly but surely you can start to see the wonder that's all around you. And you can start, to your point, realize that wonder can only be experienced in the present. And you can start to realize that what God says about you is actually true. Now there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, that you have been adopted as sons and daughters. Or come to me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest for your soul. Take my yoke upon me and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly. You will find rest that your soul is craving. All of that, I believe, is found in silence, but we're terrified of silence, so we don't go into it. And so we're starving for it.
The Switchfoot song, Adding to the Noise. If we're adding to the noise, then turn off this song.
Brilliant.
That's one thing we said about this podcast, episode 1. If this podcast is just adding to all the white noise, then turn it off. So hopefully this could even be a different kind of noise. But if it's just adding to it, silence is way better. Yeah. Okay.
I'm going to sit in silence for just a second. Right? Like that right there. People are like, wait, did they forget what was coming next? It's so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
We don't know. Anyways, I'm going a whole
We got to go.
tangent about that.
Yep.
You might recognize this next one.
Okay.
You believe something about how the world works right now that's wrong. You strongly believe something about somebody you know that's wrong. You took a Polaroid snapshot of one bad moment of their life and concluded this is who you are. This is your substance, and you are wrong. Every educated American believes at least one thing about politics that's wrong. If you disagree, I would check your heart. Maybe you made God in your image instead of the other way around. That's something I heard you say once in a sermon.
Wow. Well, it speaks for itself, Ryan. It's that good.
How was my delivery? Did I get it right?
It was pretty good. A few inflections were off, but I'll read it again. No, I was wrong. 3 words that will completely change your life if you can find a way to say it. It is so refreshing to say. And it is wild to me. Every single one of us believes something about how our nation works right now and what's going on that is wrong. None of us know every detail. All of us believe something about God, the God whose ways and thoughts are higher than ours, the maker of the universe. All of us believe something about him that's wrong. Is everything wrong? No, but all of us have something that we believe that's wrong. I put that in here also. You saw one bad moment in that person's life, and you made that moment them. In your imagination, that person is this moment. This is who you are, and you are wrong about that. You're wrong. And being able to say that, I was wrong. Hey, I could be wrong. Working that into conversations right now, I could be wrong. But man, if we could see more of that, then conversations will naturally be seasoned with more humility. And the thing you have to say, the person's ears are going to be way wider opened. If you came to me and said, hey man, I could be wrong about this, but I'm like, oh, say whatever you want. I'm just amazed in our day and age that you could admit to being wrong or to even possibly being wrong in a world where everybody wants to be right. To just go, man, I was wrong, and I want to own that. Very rare.
Yeah, the thing about Polaroid pictures is they can't change,
Mm-hmm.
but humans can.
Yep, that's good. The colder it gets outside, the more we huddle together for warmth, but the closer we get to one another, the more we hurt one another with our sharp quills. And in the lonely night of Earth's winter, eventually we begin to drift apart and wander out on our own and freeze to death in our loneliness. Arthur Schopenhauer? Schopenhauer.
This quote means a lot to me as someone who's very introverted and tends to stay away from people. Arthur, not stay away from people, but need my own space often. That's very true about how God wired me, but that doesn't mean that I can punt on community. I still need people. And so, and I need to be in community, in relationship with people. So Arthur compares us to porcupines, who they come together in the winter because they need each other for warmth. But what happens when two porcupines come together? They're gonna sting each other, and so then they sting each other and they go away, and they come back together. And it's such a poignant picture of community with a bunch of imperfect people, right? But then he goes, eventually they just wander off by themselves, and then they freeze to death in their own loneliness. And it's this haunting warning to not ever let that happen, to learn how to forgive, to learn how to give the benefit of the doubt, to learn how to be together even when it's hard.
Yeah, there's a reason I think the writer of Hebrews says, bear with one another. Never stop meeting together. And you're going to have to bear it. Why did he say that? Because people are imperfect. So you're going to need to know how to forgive fast. You're going to need to know how to bear with each other, how to have thick skin and not be offended by this or that, because we need to be around each other. Because the other solution is isolation, which is no solution at all.
No solution at all.
Yep.
God's love is like the finest wine. And because of that, it goes unappreciated on most palates. Tyler Satan.
That's really good. I heard him say this in a sermon where he was talking about fasting, that our palates for there's a lot of good things the world has to offer. We talked about it in the very first quote about, even if it's like a fantasy book or a TV show or fantasy football, whatever it is, there's a lot of, those things are good, but they're not the real, there's the deeper things, which is the love of God and the real fruit of the Spirit, the joy, the peace, the patience, the forbearance, the self-control. And the more that we just experience the good things, the more it hijacks our palates to the greater things. And there's a difference between, 2015 bottle of Silver Oak wine and a boxed generic red blend. And an experienced sommelier would taste the Silver Oak and get hints of earth and cherry and so many, and they'd be able to describe it with so many words because their palate is refined. And most of us, will take a sip and go like Michael Scott, that's a red. That's a red.
Second Michael Scott quote.
Yes. And I even think about, okay, let's do this for a second. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. Now, I would challenge you with this. If that did nothing for you, you might need to take your palate back for the deeper things. It might be that your palate's been hijacked by good things, but there's the greater things. And God's love is like fine wine. And because of that, it goes unappreciated on most palates.
In college, I was on the worship team at our ministry at the Annex, and not everything, but a lot of what we were trying to do was create these like very emotive moments, like with everything when it hits, whoa, oh, and we would work so hard to like craft these moments, and that can be a really pure way to help people experience God. But the older we all get, the more we start to realize that what's deeper than that is sitting with Psalm 23 verse 1 for 10 minutes and letting the Lord be our shepherd and speak over us. And those emotive moments aren't bad at all. I think that's a gift, and I take them anytime I can get them. Absolutely. But as you go, you learn to acquire a taste for the deeper things of God.
Poetry is sane because it floats easily in an infinite sea. Reason seeks to cross the infinite sea, and so makes it finite. The result is mental exhaustion. To accept everything is an exercise. To accept everything is an exercise. To understand everything is a strain. G.K. Chesterton.
A couple weeks ago, after your sermon on healing, I felt like I needed to take a 24-hour prayer retreat or silent retreat. Just at my house, just turn off my phone and TVs and everything, and just would go for walks and work out without any music, which is brutal. And just stayed silent. And around like hour 22, I was rereading one of my favorite books is Chesterton's Orthodoxy. And I got to this line and I started laughing, like LOLing, literally. Like I was laughing out loud. And I was 22 hours into not talking to anyone, so I may have been losing my mind. But I was like busting up in laughter. And it was because he was putting words to something that I struggle with sometimes, which is I feel like I'm often called upon to explain infinite truths in finite ways. And I do my best to try to figure out ways to do that. And at the end of the day, it falls short. And so I love what Chesterton is saying here is he goes, poetry is actually the sane one because poetry is okay with the infinite sea. Reason seeks to cross the infinite sea and so make it finite. And so reason is important, absolutely. But we also have to realize that you can't build a bridge across an infinite sea. And at some point, poetry actually makes way more sense because it's fine just to float in the infinite love of who God is.
That's really good. Boom. I like that. All right, this next one, will you read it? This was from a study that came out. There's tons of studies that are being released over the last few weeks, but this kind of sums them up if you want to read it.
Yeah, this is really important. Based on research conducted by the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University, it is estimated that 104 million people who fall under the category of people of faith, of which 41 million are Christians and 32 million attend church regularly, will not cast ballots in this election.
So I want to give a quick pastoral charge about voting this week, because all the studies are showing that about 50% of Christians in our country are not going to vote. And let me just say, if your reason for not voting is because you can't in good conscience vote for either presidential candidate, that's fair. I understand that. And if this is based off conviction, then okay. But I do want to challenge you and say, what if you still went to vote, but you left the presidency blank? Because here's why. That will show you that the reason you're not voting isn't apathy or laziness or frustration. The reason you're not voting is actually conviction. And I think a lot of Christians are actually apathetic or lazy or frustrated. And for that reason, I'm just done. I'm checking out and I'm not voting. The reason I want to say this as a pastor is because I believe it's a stewardship thing, that voting is stewardship of your citizenship, that we live in the country. We're so lucky to be alive in the United States of America in 2024. This is the country everybody wants to be at. This is also the country that everybody who lives here and complains about it or says they hate it refuse to leave it. This is where everybody wants to be. And if you are a citizen, stewardship, which is a very godly thing, looks like taking care of what you've been given to take care of. And I believe part of that is voting. And I heard wise words on YouTube a few days ago say,
YouTube.com.
yes, you're not voting for a Messiah. If you were, you shouldn't vote for either. You're not even voting for a pastor or somebody for an elder board. You're voting for president. It's going to be one of two options. And stewardship looks like, with prayer and research, doing your due diligence and making the best decision that you can, and then showing up. So go vote.
And to add to that, there's a lot going on in your community that your vote also has a say in. And so learn about what's going on in your community, learn about what's going on in your city, learn about what's going on in your state.
Mm-hmm.
Well said.
Yep. Okay, when people say, I know God forgives me, but I can't forgive myself, they mean that they have failed an idol whose approval is more important than God's.
I could have just made 10 Tim Keller quotes for
sure.
for my quotes.
Yep.
He just words things so well. I feel this in my own life sometimes, and I talk to people a lot in the lobby or whatever who I feel like are saying, I understand that God forgives me, but I can't forgive myself. I can't let myself off the hook. I know his grace is sufficient for me to get into heaven, but living free on this side of eternity, I just feel like I've made way too many mistakes for that to be true. And I love how Keller flips this. He says, when you say that, what you're really meaning is you've made an idol out of the self and you've failed that idol. And really what you're saying is that idol is the approval of that idol is more important to you than God. So really what you're saying is what I think about me is more important to me than what God thinks about me. That's just not true. And so Tim's using wordplay here to invite us to realize that God is so much greater than we realize, and that his forgiveness and his grace is so much stronger than we realize. And so when we're struggling to forgive ourselves, rest in the goodness of God.
That's really good. All right, for time's sake, Ryan, let's do these.
That's the challenge. Self-imposed restraint. That is maturity in a nutshell. It's when you have the money, you have the desire, you have the opportunity, and yet you still say, nope. Judah Smith.
This comes back again to self-regulation or self-control. Your soul wants to hear you tell it no. We just kind of say yes to everything our bodies want, everything our souls want, everything our minds want, when really your soul wants to hear you take that agency and not even chalk it up to fate or desire, but I'm intervening with a higher level of authority and saying no to myself. When you face down a temptation and you actually rise to it and you say no to yourself, you wake up the next morning and there's a bit more authority that you walk in. There's this empowerment that you have cultivated inside of you a little bit more. People who walk in that kind of authority, God is not a formula, but you don't get that anointing and authority without sacrifice. And I believe it is good for your soul to hear you say to it, nope, I have the means, I have the money, I have the desire, but to still say, no, not today, is a very empowering and healthy thing to do. Don't worry about tomorrow. Jesus.
Yeah, this comes from the Sermon on the Mount, and it is one of the most profound lines that Jesus speaks that I think I will be trying to figure out for the rest of my life. And honestly, Doug, I'm pretty worried about tomorrow, whether or not I'll be able to understand this quote then. I'm kidding. It's crazy how often we worry about the future, how often we worry about tomorrow. Jesus seemed to have this uncanny ability to be present right where he was. And now that doesn't mean that we don't plan for the future, doesn't mean that we don't strategize for the future. It just means that at some point we have to drop all of the worry about tomorrow. There's a lot of that going on in the world right now. And yet there are people right in front of you today to love. And so who is that person for you to love today?
Boom.
Our greatest fear should not be of failure, but of succeeding at things in life that don't really matter. Francis Chan.
The GOAT, eternal perspective preacher.
Truly.
I think we said this last week, but he says, I get criticized all the time for worrying, going overboard, worrying about my first 10 billion years in eternity. And he said, with all due respect, I think everybody goes overboard worrying about their last 10 years on this planet.
Tough to argue.
Yeah, it really is. But of succeeding at all the things in life that don't really matter, that should be our greatest fear. That everything that I did and I hustled for, and it was all to build my kingdom that really is more like a sandcastle that will be washed away by the next wave. And I put every ounce of effort and all my worries and effort and all into that sandcastle instead of building the kingdom of heaven that will be here 100 million years from now. And then last but not least, Ryan, perfection is the enemy of progress. Winston Churchill.
After every sermon I preach, every podcast we make, everything I write, including right now, I'm always tempted to replay the things that didn't go perfectly and wish like, oh, if I could have done this, I would have done it this way. Maybe we should just go back. Maybe we should redo it. And there is a time and a place for excellence. And you and I are both really passionate about being excellent in our crafts. What I've found in my life is that perfectionism, though, ends up hindering my progress. And so in an attempt to make things perfect, I don't actually put anything out into the world, or I don't actually hit publish on things. And so I have so much content on my computer that just sits there. And I think what Churchill is getting at is we don't have to get this perfect, but let's make some progress, including this last hour of talking through these 20 quotes. I probably would have said a few things a little different if we could run it back, but let's not focus on the imperfections of it. Let's realize that we said a whole bunch of good things that are going to be helpful moving forward, and focus less on perfection and more on making progress.
20 quotes that could change your life.